But the legacy of the Steam machine is not dead yet. No, there's another company that is trying to emulate the core concept of the Steam machine, really, which was to bridge the gap between PC and console gaming. And if you would, without knowing the title of the video, obviously, because it gave it away, but without knowing the title of the video, would you really think that the name of the company that's trying to do this, out of all the companies out there, would be Atari? Atari? The same people who made the Jaguar and haven't made a console for like over 20 years and are now trying to get back into the console market in a very weird timing, also in a time where there's really no demands for a new console, and it's just weird. Why are they all of a sudden going for a new console? So, well, the thing is, it's probably never gonna come to market. It's probably gonna be like the Phantom. I don't know if you guys know what the Phantom was, but it was pretty much this vaporware console that was so hyped up. It was supposed to be the most revolutionary thing to ever hit the market. It was supposed to be like this DVR streaming video game console, kind of like OnLive, if you guys know what OnLive was, or a better example would be PlayStation Now. It was kind of like that, but that was in 2004 that they were saying this is going to happen. And, of course, it never came to market. For what I know, the company actually still exists. They have 3 employees, and I don't know what they're doing. I assume that they moved on, but the company didn't ever go bankrupt. It still exists as a company. The Phantom, forget the name of the exact company name, but the company that announced the Phantom in E3 2004, and it was supposed to be a huge thing. They still exist in some capacity. I don't know in what capacity. Probably nothing, because they haven't released this console 13 years later. But this Atari box really reminds me of the Phantom in a lot of ways, because they're making all these crazy promises. Oh my God, this is going to be so amazing. And, well, first of all, it's going to be an Indiegogo campaign. An Indiegogo campaign. Yeah, no, the whole crowdfunding console thing has probably left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths, especially with the Ouya, and to a lesser extent, the Coleco Chameleon. So that's really a big red flag there when it comes to how well this Atari box is going to do, if it actually comes to market at all, since they're relying on crowdfunding. But even without the crowdfunding aside, there's not much details that are given about the Atari box, and there will be more details, but the details we have so far aren't looking too great. So, first of all, let's talk about the price. The price is supposed to range from $249 to $299. I assume that one's going to have like less memory in it or something. I guess that's what it's going to be, because that's usually what happens when there's one cheaper version and a more expensive version. It has to do with hard drive space. So that's probably what it's going to be. Now, okay, so $300 would be about $50 more expensive than the competition, or around the same price range as the competition, depending on the way you want to see things, whether you're talking about the PS4 Pro or whatever, right? So here's the thing about this console, though. Let's talk about its specs, because that's obviously the most important one. So let's read this here. Atari has not released the exact specifications of the Atari box, but states that it will be based on a customized AMD central processor and will use Radeon graphic processing technology. Pictures of the unit released in 2017 showed HDMI and USB ports, an Ethernet port, SD card slot. SD card slot, that's pretty interesting. Is that how they're going to use their memory? Okay. The unit's photos, the look and the feel of the Atari 600. Yeah, so as you could see in the thumbnail, the look, the aesthetic is based off of the Atari 2600, but you look at the size of it, it looks pretty fucking small, don't you think? For a new console, like that's pretty. I don't know what to think about that, but it definitely aesthetically looks good, though. I'm not saying it looks bad. It looks very good, but its size might be an indication of its power. And so the guy behind the Atari box, his name is Firgal Mac Conolda. Oh my God, I'm so terrible at names sometimes, but he's trying to restore Atari. He's trying to bring Atari back into the home console market, and he's pretty much the general manager of the Atari box. And he was inspired to create the Atari box after seeing players connect laptops to televisions as to play games on the larger screen that were not traditionally available for consoles, as well as then using social media platforms outside the games via the laptop to communicate with friends. He also saw that Atari's game catalog had a good amount of brand recognition. Okay, let me stop you right there. The Atari back catalog is not going to be enough to save to make this console like a huge appeal. Yes, the Atari name still holds some weight because, you know, everyone's like, if your grandma finds out that Atari's making a new console, oh my God, Atari's making a new console, or even your parents or whatever. Like anyone in your family that grew up during that time, be like, oh my God, Atari's making another console. Like they might be interested in that. The problem is, the back catalog is not going to be enough to generate enough interest in the console because the Atari 2600 has not aged well at all. The console came out this year, 40 years ago. Came out in 1977. And you compare just the Atari 2600 to the NES, and the way that the games have aged, it's not, you can't even compare it. It's crazy. Like the generation gap between the Atari 2600 and the NES was probably one of the greatest generational gaps ever. Because you think about the gap between the NES and Super Nintendo was a pretty big leap. I guess the leap from 4th to 5th gen was also a pretty big one. And from 5th to 6th gen was also pretty significant. But from 6th to 7th, yeah, it was pretty big. 7 to 8, not so much. So, yeah, that was a pretty big leap from generation. I'm sorry, not from the first to second, but from the second to the third, because second generation consoles was Atari. That's my mistake. Anyway, so that's something that's kind of troubling me because they're talking so much about the back catalog, but yet they're acting like that has any significance because it's going to come preloaded with old Atari games. But the problem is, can you name one Atari game that's like iconic? That's like, oh my God, this game is so amazing. Like a game that was exclusive to Atari. I can't think of one. Now, if they also included games that were originally published by Atari in the past, that might be interesting, although those games weren't that great either, but at least they're aged better. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to really market this thing. They're really trying to market it the same way as the Steam Machine, except it's going to I guess they're trying to learn from the mistakes of the Steam Machine because this guy, Conolad, I fucking can't pronounce his last name. It's Conulladh. Yeah, sorry. I can't pronounce this dude's name, but pretty much it's going to be a Linux-based console. So it's going to be kind of like the Steam Machine, except it's going to be a much more open source than the Steam Machine was, because remember the Steam Machine used the Steam OS. This is going to just directly use a Linux operating system, like directly Linux. It's going to be strict. It's going to be pure Linux based. So I mean that's exciting to some people because a lot of people like Linux, and Linux is good for gaming in a lot of ways. It's very open source. People think PC gaming is open. Linux is a whole nother thing. Linux is like one of the most open OSs ever. And it's also very complicated. Like, I've tried to get into Linux, and it's just way too complex for me to even delve into. I'm sure you guys know I'm not a big hardware guy. I don't have as much knowledge with hardware as other people do, but I try to make up with that with my knowledge of just, history of gaming, and I obviously have a lot of software knowledge. And I mean, when I have no hardware knowledge, I mean when it comes to specs, like specifically, like what this chip can do and what that chip can do. So I am admittedly not the biggest expert when it comes to hardware, but I can kind of see the writing on the wall that the hardware of this console does not seem that impressive, and it's probably going to be outdated pretty soon. And I'm saying this because the Conolad, fucking whatever the fuck his name is, he said that they anticipate the hardware is comparable to a mid-range personal computer for 2017, powerful enough to run most games, but not for more recent AAA titles. Oh boy. So you're releasing a new console that is going to be on the same price, sometimes even more expensive than the PS4 and Xbox One, yet can't run new AAA games. How is that supposed to work? How do you justify that price point knowing that information? I definitely knowing that information would be very unwilling to spend that much money on a new console from a company that honestly hasn't had credibility in over 35 years. Why would I do that? And that's pretty much all we know so far about the Atari box. We don't know anything about what games are going to be coming. We don't know anything about what the controller looks like. We don't know we don't really know that much about basic things about the console. We know about the software. It's going to be Linux based, and we know something about the hardware specs, and that doesn't look too promising. But beyond that, we don't know all that much. So I guess some people would say, like, well, you don't know all that much about it yet. You shouldn't make such a judgment on the Atari box yet because there's a chance that it could be like a sleeper success. I just don't see that happening. I mean, they talked about how the Ouya and the Steam Machine failed, and they're going to learn from the mistakes of those two consoles, but I really don't see that happening, especially if they're releasing a $300 console that's underpowered. Come on, what are you thinking? A $300 console that can't run new games. And you're releasing a new console in 2018 that can't run new games. How's that going to work? That's honestly the number one thing that makes me think this is not going to be a success. Because at least with Nintendo, they're also another company that has the problem with having underpowered hardware. So the thing about Nintendo is that their first-party games are second to none. Their first-party properties, Mario, Zelda, you name it, all of those games, for a lack of third-party support they may have, although they do have some third-party support right now, at least a lot more than they did on the Wii U. But even with the Wii U, when they didn't have the third-party support, they still had, a somewhat of a base. He had almost 20 million Wii U sold because of the exclusives. And the funny thing is, the Wii U didn't even have that many exclusives. So, yeah, no, Nintendo is very different than Atari. Also, the whole Switch gimmick was very appealing. I think a Switch, having a hybrid between handheld and home console gaming is a lot more of an appealing gimmick than just having a Linux console. Most people in the game community probably don't even know what Linux is. So, or just the general public, most of them don't know what a Linux is, don't know how it works or anything like that. So, good luck having that being your main selling point, honestly. And this just doesn't seem like this is going to be a success at all. Atari getting back into the console market, when I first heard about that, I was like, that's kind of interesting. But when I learned more, the more I learned, the more I'm like, this is not going to be good. It's not going to work out. And they decided to do how they're funding this console, crowdfunding. Also not a good sign. Because most of these crowdfunding console projects, like I said, end up to be a total bust. And I'm very doubtful that this will be the first console to break that trend. The first crowdfunded console to break that trend. With the Ouya and the Coleco Chameleon and all the other countless consoles that were pitched on Indiegogo or Kickstarter or whatever, ended up to be just to be an absolute failure or to just end up being vaporware. I don't know if this is going to be vaporware, but it's like the Phantom was. But it's probably going to be more like an Ouya in terms of actually no, the Ouya was very very much overhyped. I can't even see there being a hype behind this. So I could see it kind of being more like a Steam machine, trying to bridge the gap between PC and console gaming, but they're ending up, just appealing to a market that doesn't exist. And I think that's what's going to happen with the Atari box.